Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Yes.
All right, well, for everyone who hasn't met him yet, this is Tim Lau. You guys have already seen the ad for today's event. There he is. It's for obviously our architectural visualization workshop. And at the end, we've also got a little bit of digital and online presentation tips and tricks now that we've kind of transitioned to an online studio, particularly for those of you guys in Studio 4. I know that's most of us here. So for you guys in Ainsley Studios as well, and perhaps also Studio 2. For you guys, we also have a few tips to help you with presentations. But without further ado, we'll start today's event. So David, you want to go to the next slide? That's okay. Yep, so again, welcome everyone to our event. And again, like I said, this is Tim. Clearly your hair's grown out since the photo. I clearly haven't gotten that lockdown haircut yet. But this is Tim. He's one of our Masters of Architecture students at UNSW. And he has been featured in 2020 and 2021 Luminosity exhibitions as well for his works, particularly his Studio 4 works has gotten a lot of credits and recognition. I know when I did Studio 4 last year, Ainsley also featured him in one of our lectures as a guest lecturer and also gave something similar, like a similar talk to what he's giving you guys today. So you guys are getting an updated version of what we got last year, plus a little bit more. And I think, Tim, how long have you been working at CplusC as well? You've been working.
I've been here for about a year and about 6 months-ish, so a year and a half.
Yeah, and like what you guys saw before at the front page, that's something you did for your work, yes?
Yes, that's one of our upcoming projects.
Yeah, so that just goes to show that some of these rendering skills that you guys are learning about today can obviously help you in the long run with employment as well. So it's not just limited to studio renders, and you can obviously go above and beyond like what Tim's has done here. So for anyone interested, that's his Instagram page there, lau.arc.jpg. Give him a follow. All his works are really, really good, as you guys already see here on the screen, and what he'll be showing you in a few seconds. So again, for anyone who hasn't signed up, please sign up. It's just sign in, sorry, it's just on the chat there. But I think, Tim, if you wanted to take the stage, give it to you.
Yep.
Just request control. Yep.
Okay. Let's see if this works.
Cool.
Hold on. Oh. Is that me?
David, did we give the control?
Yeah, I didn't click anything.
Okay, so that's you, yes.
Okay.
Awesome.
Hold on.
Also, feel free to turn on your cameras, guys, as well.
Wait, which slide is this on? I can't click through.
Give it a second. Yep.
Oh, there we go.
Okay.
Let's see. Yes, so I'll start off with just some inspiration behind doing this sort of renders. So I've more or less recently been looking into film photography and stuff. I do take photos in my spare time. And so as a result, my renders try to approach a sort of so-called hyper-realistic approach to visualization. So these are a few of the inspirations that I've been kind of aspiring to over the past year and a half. So there's this guy called 50 Shades of Jason. He does really nice film photos. He's got a really neutral color palette. And it's been something that I've been trying out recently in my renders. And then, why is it not changing? Oh, yep. So here's another one of his images. So what I like about these is he obviously has the subject of his photo right in the middle, but he's also got a lot of foreground elements. So he's using the vegetation to frame this sort of view. So what I like to do with renderings is to have the subject somewhere in the middle, maybe off to the side, and often to frame it with some foreground elements so your eye gets directed to the middle. Okay, and here are some other architecture examples that you might have seen. So this is the Q House, I believe, in Victoria by John Wardle. So these architectural photos, I've been kind of looking at them because they have this sort of warm tone. There's a consistency in the work and it reflects the materiality of the architect. So with your visualization, obviously we need to reflect a realistic material, depending probably on your stream that you might end up in. The materials that you choose in a render need to be preferably localized. So yeah, try to be accurate with your material choice, basically. Why is it not changing?
I think there's like a slight delay. Maybe if you had shared it yourself, might be a bit better.
Okay.
Yeah, I'll stop.
Okay, I'll just I'll switch it up then. Sorry, give me 1 second.
Oh, good. I'll be posting some of the dot points that Tim's saying in the chat. So I'm just compiling it. And for those of you who kind of want to have a copy of that, I'll put it in the chat at the end of the event.
All right, let's try share screen. Okay, can you all see this?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Cool.
Thank you.
Yep, so this is another photographer, so Clinton Weaver. He's got these warm tones, which I think reflect the materiality quite well in his photos. And you've got a bit of diffused light off to the side, which just kind of highlights the atmosphere of the office that he's trying to capture. Here's another photographer. He's based in New York, I believe. And I just kind of like how he positions people, a subject, just to get a sense of proportion and scale within his photos, and obviously trying to emulate that in the renders as well. So with aspect ratios, so depending on online or in-person formats, now that we're online, we tend to go for screens. So you'd probably go for landscape renders. So here's a standard 3:2 aspect ratio. I think most cameras will take a 3:2 photo, but what I like to do is to get a more cinematic look. And so you've got either a widescreen format, so what you see on YouTube, like 1080p, 1440p, those are mostly 16:9 ratios. And then you've got a cinematic crop, which is 21:9. So as your screen kind of gets squished and then it gets a bit wider, you get a more cinematic look to your photos or your videos. So this is one of the houses that we've been doing at work out in rural New South Wales. So this one's a composite between an actual photo and a render off Lumion. So I've got here an actual, like a PNG of a tree, and the grass and the skies are all from like an actual site photo, and it's just the building that's a render. So what I do most of the time is I look at this rule of thirds that often applies to photography as well. So you've got, so apparently when people look at a photo, you don't necessarily look straight at the center. Your eyes are more focused towards these 4 points here that land at the intersection of these lines. So I like to put the horizon line or eye level more or less on the bottom third, or sometimes a bit higher. But I've also positioned the person right smack bang in the middle here. And then you've got the house in the sort of middle grid, and then the background at the top. And you'll see that the tree almost meets this third here. So you've got more foreground elements contrasting the background elements. Here's another example of a speculative we did in Bondi. So with this one, it's also a bit about the thirds. So you've got 1/3 of the photo with people, just to get a sense of scale. Then you've got a sort of light well right up through the middle where you get a peek of someone at the top. So your eyes are kind of being navigated up from the shadows down at the bottom up to the top. And one tip that I like to say is if your building just looks really bland, just add plants to it and it'll look fine. It's a bit of a cop-out, but it works. So with light, make sure your light is actually from where the sun is. Don't put your light coming from like the south or something, because that never happens. I'm not sure if tutors will pick up on it, but it will not reflect an accurate depiction of the atmospherics of your space if you just randomly flood your room with sunlight. With movement as well, I know this is still, but in videos, consider slow movements on your camera. I think it's depending on who, but I believe that slow movements are a little bit more effective than a fly-through because it captures the atmospheric of the space you want to capture. In terms of color, think also about whether you want to use black and white or color. I think with black and white, you get a greater sense of materiality and the contrast between light and shadow, whereas with color, you might get a more unified palette and you can bring out the plants that you put into your render. Always consider people as well. People will definitely give you a sense of scale. I think with this photo, for example, if we didn't have these people there, you wouldn't know whether this thing would be 3 stories or a massive 10-story monolith. Also with depth of field, you might consider putting some foreground elements with a sort of blur on it, so your eye's more focused on your space or your building. And consider your renders as either a photo or a video that you're taking in real life. So if you're holding a camera at this building that you've created, you wouldn't be holding it up like 3 stories. You'd be looking at things from eye level. So consider how a user of this space would see it and not how a bird would see it. Here's another speculative that I just kind of worked on. This one's more so about the foreground elements. So you'll see this mini little van here. So by using the van and the window as a sort of framing element, your eyes are kind of directed towards the architecture, and you don't have such a boring frame without these framing elements, because number one, below you'd be seeing terrace houses, which isn't necessarily bad because of context. But say if your 3D model was lacking detail, then you can just slap a car on there, move the camera down a bit, and you've saved yourself a bit of work. Here's another one I did for Studio just last sem. So I do all my renders on Lumion, so hopefully this applies to a few of you. So Lumion has this handy feature called a material ID that I didn't discover until 3rd year. It's really helpful. So it generates a color map of your render and splits up the materials into just block colors, which means that you can mask out elements very easily, particularly areas where you've got plants and your lines aren't really straight. So these two are just generated straight out from Lumion. And also with materials, make sure you don't use SketchUp or whatever software materials in Lumion. Lumion materials trump pretty much everything else in your default program. So this is the final render. So you'll see that with the material ID, it's a lot easier to select out this tree without having to get a lasso tool in Photoshop and just work your way around the trees or the leaves. With people as well, you'll notice that they're all on eye level. So when you put in people on Photoshop or in Lumion, their eye line should be horizontal if they're all on the same plane, unless you've got someone up the top. So no matter how far they are from the frame, if they're on ground level, their eyes should always be just above the horizon line. With the framing elements as well. So you've got vegetation framing the bottom of the frame and the sides, and then you've got the building in the background. So you end up with a more nuanced composition of your render. Here's another one we did for work. So this is one of the bathrooms. So this is what may happen when you come across setting custom textures. So we looked at using a very specific type of timber and a rammed earth wall and corrugated roofs, none of which are found in a Lumion library. So there's a website online called Architectures. They generate a lot of different custom textures based on photos they can then use in your renders. So I grabbed a rammed earth texture off Google and then just put it into Lumion, and it works out relatively well. One thing I would point out is I did kind of screw it up here. With your timber, it's very tempting to just set the grain direction of timber and just leave it and render. So what you see up here as the lintel, that should be horizontal and not just vertical timber boards. So make sure your timber and the grain is actually in the right direction when you render it. So how this scene was conceived. So obviously I've got the material ID once again, then the raw Lumion render, and then a photo from the actual site. So using the material ID, it's a lot easier to just select the window, mask out the middle, and then put the photo behind, and then you've already got a much more convincing context. Because with views all the way out, you wouldn't want to have to create a landscape from scratch if you're looking out into a vista. One thing also to point out, make sure you don't include the Lumion logo in your renders. It looks a lot more professional if you just crop them out. So please do that. So moving on to sort of films. So here's a few things to consider before I show a bunch of examples. So consider your film as a sort of narrative. You need to have a sort of intention when you're doing a fly through or when you're doing a few atmospherics of your spaces. If you're jumping from space to space without some sort of coordination, it's really easy to get lost, especially when it's not a built project and it's just a visualization. Also, have a sort of focus for your film. Are you focusing on materiality, form, function, how the human uses the space, how it responds to the context? Also think about the large and small scale interventions of your site. So if, say, you're making a tower, will you focus on a big picture view of the building, or will you also focus on small elements like a balustrade or a table or any sort of special features? Also with realism, whether you're focusing on being super realistic or being abstract, don't be kind of on the fence and in between. It's a lot more convincing if you go straight for abstract or if you go straight for something that's realistic. In terms of render settings, this is just basically a table of settings you can use. When I render videos out of Lumion, I like to use a higher frame rate. Sometimes 60 FPS will do. Other times, exceptions, 200 frames per second. So that way, when I put it into Premiere Pro to stitch the video together, you can slow down the footage and then you can kind of fake a slow motion video. When you're doing online presentations, I used to export in 4K, which was not a good option because it just meant I'm waiting for about 2 hours for like a 5-second clip. For online presentations, 1440p or 1080p is perfectly sufficient, just like you see on a normal YouTube video. Because when you're screen sharing, it loses quality anyway, and I don't think tutors normally pick up on the resolution of renders too much. When you're rendering stills, try to make sure that when or if you edit in Photoshop, although I would recommend it. Try to use 150 to 300 DPI in your settings before you've actually opened the file or made the file. I think sometimes it defaults to 72. So sometimes when you print it out or when you zoom in, it just gets very pixelated, which is probably not what you want. Okay, so I'll just share a quick example of a video. Let's see if this works. Can everyone see this?
Yeah, we can.
Cool.
Was there supposed to be volume there, Tim? I don't think we can hear that.
Oh, it doesn't really matter. It's just just imagine there's lo-fi in the background. Okay, so that's about it. So what you'll notice about probably this last frame is the best example. When you're looking at a large scale project, still consider all the fine grained elements of your design. For example, this one is literally just a balustrade and a staircase, but if you just zoom in really close, put on some sunlight, make it move around and just put it in slow motion, it looks like you've done a lot of work. So that's one way to look at the micro scale things. Another one. So say this one, for example, as well. So you've got the building in the foreground and a few vegetated elements. Sorry, building as the subject and a few vegetated elements in the foreground. Sometimes it's a good idea to turn on the wind so it looks like it's actually moving properly. And also one thing about choosing vegetation, make sure it's actually Australian and probably native. If you put on like a maple tree or like a palm tree in the middle of the CBD, it's not very reflective of context and it's less sensitive as a plant. So consider vegetation as a material and that should do you a lot of good. Also consider how your camera moves. So for example, you've got panning elements. It's just the subtleties of moving your camera up slowly to create a bit of drama in your scene. With this one as well, you can, if you slow down the movement of a person, it just makes it look a bit more cinematic. I think everything in slow-mo just makes everything look a bit better, which is why I just slow everything down. And also just make sure there's a sense of proportion in your frame. So in this situation, you've got the architecture as the framing element, and you've got the person as the subject of your shot. Say in this one as well, the architecture is also the framing element, and it's just the clouds and the trees in the background that's moving. So in a way, it's a good way to use your architecture to capture the context of your project. Another thing with this shot as well that I was inspired by If you haven't checked out the local project already, they do a lot of good films, and they have a really good cinematography team. And yeah, they have a really nice color grading tool that they use just to get a consistency throughout all their works. But yeah, that's pretty much all from me.
Hi, Tim. I have a question. If you could go
Yes.
to like the 22nd, I think.
20, how much?
27, I think it's the facade.
27? This one?
Yeah, like what's your intention behind this one? Because I just don't know why the street level was cut off.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So my street level, often you'll notice with Lumion that as you look at the horizons, there's like no detail, it's just an empty landscape. So in order to avoid that, I just cropped it out basically. And the idea with this one was, so in this project, there's a bunch of heritage houses off to the right. You've got a building and then a few like 50-meter tall stories just behind this building. So the idea was just that once you look up, you see this, it's not so much a focus on the street level, but yeah, that was this job.
I see. Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? And thanks for the presentation, Tim, as well.
Good.
Does anyone else have any questions? Just to let you know, again, for those of you who missed the introduction, Tim obviously did really well in his Studio 4 project. And I know most of you guys are doing Ainsley Studio at the moment with the co-loader. And that one's a very tactile and experimental kind of project. And Ainsley gives you a lot of freedom on how you show your work. And I think cinematography and Lumion and videography is actually one of the main, I guess, pathways that she endorses in her studio. So this is something to consider. So if anyone's got any questions about that, please just jump in anytime. But I think a really good point that is brought up, and it's particularly applicable for Studio 4, is the capturing of environment and context and depicting that as accurate as possible. Something like co-loader, obviously you want to preserve a lot of its natural, I guess, vegetation, but the atmosphere as well. And I don't know if anyone here has already seen Tim's Studio 4 video. I have, but it's very much focused on the environment and on like the way the ocean might interact with your architecture and how the light might hit upon your architecture. So these little things do matter because obviously you don't want to have your sun coming from a north direction when really the co-loader I think is facing west. So like you got to actually consider these things and actually play around with the materials and the orientation of things. And if for anyone else who wanted the settings, I did pop them in the chat as well. I think that's something else to consider. Lumion can be a little bit tricky to export. Oh my God, I had that trouble last time and Tim actually helped me with that. So those are just the settings for you guys to use. And as goes for the vegetation stuff. So Tim, you're saying don't use SketchUp and external vegetations and materials, use them from Lumion?
Yes, so I think most materials in SketchUp just kind of come up really weird. So what happens with Lumion is there's like something called a bump map. So it shows the actual, what do you call it? It shows the actual texture as a 3D, I guess it's called the 3D model. So if you have a piece of wood, for example, you have like grains and like grooves inside them. With SketchUp textures, you don't have that. And if you're using SketchUp trees or vegetation, I think all you're doing is just slowing the model down. So it's probably better just to do it in Lumion. And I think Lumion has a lot of native trees as well, so that helps.
And I think with that as well, when you import from SketchUp, most of the time your materials tend to be 2Ds, particularly like the trees and stuff, because obviously when you model it on SketchUp, you're not going to use the 3D ones because it slows down your SketchUp file. So what ends up happening is Lumion reads it as a 2D, so don't use the SketchUp vegetation as we just discussed because it will show in your fly-throughs particularly. And if you want to have a lot more vegetation, I know it's easier to import on SketchUp, but like what Tim does as well is mix and match different platforms. And I know you guys are used to that, but again, like don't just rely on Lumion alone. Actually, as great as Lumion is, I think something that our cohort particularly has been told is not to overuse it. And what I mean by that is don't just rely on it specifically, like also bring it into Photoshop, add the peoples there, add the trees or vegetation that you didn't have there, edit the textures a little bit as well, so it doesn't look stock standard material. Like if everyone else in the grade is going to have it, then nothing is going to separate your one from their one. So obviously give it a little bit of your own style and flair to it, whether that's the people. I think, Tim, you trademark yours with Shrek everywhere. So Tim uses
We won't talk about that.
we actually incorporated that in one of our slides, so you guys will see it
Oh,
later.
okay.
So yeah, have your own little quirks. I know, for example, some people use the particular ArchiCAD people in their work consistently. I don't know if Ivy's in this event, but if Ivy's in this event, she'll know too. For her Studio 4, I know she used like little animals for her one, which was something that I really found really adorable. So, have a little bit of your own quirk into their work. I can see a few hands. Let me just see who's... Does someone just want to jump in because I can't actually see the hands. So if anyone's got a question, just unmute.
David.
Yeah, I'll just go first. So So just leading on from Kai's question, I just noticed you have like these context buildings. I think an interesting question to ask is about setting up your Lumion file. How detailed did you make your context buildings, and how did you kind of put the materiality on that as well?
Yep. So with this specific one, I just chose to make it all white because honestly, I just couldn't be bothered to texture everything. But yeah, so with this particular one, so it's in Parramatta. So it's quite a big site, which meant I was in a group of 5 or 6 mates, and we just kind of distributed the workload to model them up in detail. I think it's very much worth it to detail to great lengths, like the immediate context, and just do massing for the ones a bit further away. But yeah, I spent a considerable amount of time to model up like these background buildings. Yeah.
Fair enough. I think I saw Melissa put her hand up. Did she already get her question answered? Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. I just have a follow-through question about the materials.
Yeah.
Is the outcome still bad when you import your own materials on SketchUp? Because when I get textures online, I put it on SketchUp. Rendering it on V-Ray, just sort of like playing around with it, actually looks pretty realistic. Would it be similar to Lumion?
Yeah, I think V-Ray, I haven't personally played around with V-Ray that much, but I think V-Ray is probably a lot more advanced than like what I can kind of do, which is why I never touched it. But yeah, if it turns out, if the SketchUp textures turn out great on V-Ray, then yeah, go for it. I think most of the time the problems I just come across on Lumion is having like a square texture, and then you just see it repeating throughout a facade. So you don't want a grid of textures. But if you find something seamless or ones that you import that are pretty successful, then yeah, definitely go for those.
What are your thoughts on Enscape?
Enscape. I haven't personally used it as well, but I know a lot of people in my year who are currently using it. I can't really actually tell the difference between Lumion and Enscape renders that much, so definitely go for that as well. Whichever one you're most comfortable with.
Okay. I think Lachlan has his hand up.
Oh yes. I just had a quick question as well. I was just looking at part 1 of the presentation. I wasn't too sure what the rule of thirds were. Could you just clarify what that actually is?
All right. Which slide did you say?
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's it. Yes. Thank you.
All right. So the rule of thirds is kind of like the same principle as the golden ratio, except you're just breaking stuff in thirds. So the concept is that people's eyes are more drawn to the third whatever you call it, the third part of a frame where
Quadrant?
these lines kind of intersect.
It's not even a quadrant, but yeah.
Quadrant, but like the 3 versions, that thing.
Right.
So your eyes are normally drawn to these 4 points, and then so I just base my visualizations on the 3s.
Gotcha.
Hope that answers your questions, Lachlan.
Yes, it did. Thank you.
I believe that's Tan. Do you have a question?
Sorry, no.
No? Okay.
Tim,
Yes.
I've seen that your style is primarily like hyper realistic. What about other styles? Like, do you have any opinion on them?
Yeah, that's just my personal preference. I think, yeah, and I guess from the perspective of tutors, they don't really mind as well. I think it's just based on whether whichever style of abstraction you go for, if it correlates with the theme or the intention of your project, then I think there's no reason to question why you shouldn't do it. I think, yeah, any style is perfectly fine as long as you have a justification for it. I don't have any preferences though, but personally, I just do this realistic stuff. Yeah.
The realistic style normally takes more time than other styles, right?
Yeah. For example, this one took about maybe like, this one didn't take too long. This took about an hour or two. I think other styles you can go for, yes, if it's still renders. I think Photoshop montage ones are pretty decent because you can just get actual photos of textures. They reflect it quite well. I'd say sometimes you don't even need to do a computer generated render. I think there's a few really successful ones that are just hand drawn or just made up of line work. And I think most tutors are quite happy with those as well.
Jared, did you have a question?
Yeah, thanks, David. Yeah, awesome presentation, Tim. I think what's really beautiful about your renders is that soft quality of light that you're able to achieve. And I was wondering, obviously, without giving away any of your secrets, if any tips that you can give to, within Lumion, how can we achieve a softer light so it's not as harsh? If you could shed some light on that.
So the softness of light I don't really do that in Lumion. It's more just a post-processing thing. So I'll just look for an example. Which one? Yeah, you know what? I'll just use. Yeah, I'll just stick with this one. What I like to do is just to get the base Lumion render, and then if you go into Photoshop and there's a soft brush that you can use, like just the default one, or I like to use some fog brushes that you can just download off the internet. So if you just brush over your photo really lightly, especially in the highlight areas, and then you turn the mode to soft, the mode from normal to soft light, that kind of blends the photo together and gives it a sort of, I guess, diffused light kind of look. Yeah.
Oh, how interesting. So it's mainly, so the sun in Lumion doesn't matter too much as long as you soften it afterwards.
Yeah, and I prefer not to use like a midday sun because that's really harsh. So anything that's like in the late morning or like early afternoon, I think those ones are perfect. Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah.
So Tim, would you say like most of your work is setting up the file and then most of it's just post-production in Photoshop?
Yeah, so I think doing the materials takes quite a while and also getting the vegetation right. And then if I was to distribute it, I'd say 50% of my time is just setting up the file. The other like 25 is waiting for it to load, and the other 25 is Photoshop. Yeah.
Right. Just before Gene asks another question, I think Ben's been waiting for a while, so he just asked, do you use the native tools in Lumion to edit the clips that you export, or do you use any other external softwares for your videos?
Yeah, so I render the clips, each clip individually, and then I stitch it all together in Premiere Pro. And then I do a bit of color grading onto the clips individually as well.
Nice, thank you.
Just an extension to the last question, to Jared's question. For those people working on Lumion and not necessarily bringing it to Premiere Pro or anything like that, what are your tips for exporting? And I know there was a few like settings that you had to turn off while you're working, for example, like the sun and I think the shadows and stuff as well. I know you played around with I1 last year when you helped me. So for those of you guys working in Lumion, this is for you guys. What are some of the, I guess, settings that you definitely recommend to the Studio 4 kids?
Yep. So I might type this up later as well.
Yes, please.
So in Lumion, there's like the preset settings. I think there's like the night one, realistic, interior. I normally just go for realistic, and then I turn off the chromatic aberrations. So I think what that does is just creates a sort of rainbow effect on like the edges of the photo. So it kind of mimics a camera effect. I don't really like it because it just looks like you've got a rainbow slapped onto your render. So turn that off because it also slows the render down. Turn off depth of field if you don't need any blurring in your foreground or background, unless you're looking at something super close up. Use the sun study as well. So the sun study will locate, once you click sun study, it will turn into like a globe and then you can locate where your building is roughly. So if it's in Sydney, just click Sydney and then move the time zone to, I think, 10 hours plus, which will reflect the accurate time zone. And that way you won't have to play around with exactly where you want the sun to be. You can just select a time and then the sun will be in that set location at whichever time you want it to be. Sometimes I like to use volumetric sunlight as well, just to get the sun rays in. But I've been told over the years not to use it too much because like you don't really see sun rays that often anyway, unless you're in a really foggy environment. I think that's about it. Yeah, if you've got the realistic settings on, those are more than enough to generate a pretty decent render.
Awesome, thank you. Also, real quickly, I know you said before you put some lo-fi music on, but didn't play. I remember last year in your Studio 4 you used a classical music, I think, was that?
Yes.
Yeah, so you used classical and now you've shifted to lo-fi. Do you think that music obviously impacts the way that the video is received?
Yeah, so yeah, I think in Studio 4 I picked up some like Rachmaninoff or something.
Yeah.
So it's kind of dramatic. But I think that was just based on the fact that because our brief was a bit different, we had to do an experimental art foundation. So it was more about like the atmospherics, the feeling of the actual spaces. So that's why I thought like a classical piece would work a bit better. Nowadays I just go for lo-fi because that's what the local project kind of does, and I kind of just like their stuff. But yeah, I think choose the music based on how you want the space to be perceived. Like if you have, I don't know, if you're rendering like a Zen garden, don't put like AC/DC over it because it just doesn't work. Yeah, I think just to suit, like, just choose whatever music suits the mood, and ideally don't choose something that's like really cringe. Sorry if anyone's done that. I've done it as well. So.
Oh God. But that's again part of what you said before, I guess, about creating the correct atmosphere and representing it the way that it's supposed to in terms of what the actual project's supposed to convey. So again, consider what your project's trying to say, what the vibes are in that, and how someone being in that space would experience it. I don't think about it as a separate, non-existent project. Think about it as something that is real and existing. And I think in Studio 4, I'm not sure if you guys did that exercise for the first mission, but we did in the last years, is we had to match songs and just sounds and rhythms to the actual site. So that's something else to consider. So music does play a role in that as well. I think Claire, you had your hand up.
Hello, Timothy.
What's up?
Yeah, I think your presentation's like a real gift to everyone here. I've been learning a lot. I just got a question in regards to, I think you mentioned to me before that custom materials are super important.
Yeah.
So I was like, for example, if I wanted to do like rammed earth, right? How would I like go about doing that?
Yeah. So I'll actually just run us through it. I'll just open. Give me a second. So just look up like, okay, rammed earth texture. Choose something that's definitely seamless so you don't see like grids in your texture.
And is there a website that has like textures that we could go onto?
Yeah, there's a really good one called Google.
Oh yeah, great. I love Google.
And there's also Architectures. So
okay.
Yeah, they have pretty much everything from like, I don't even know if they have rammed earth, but they have a lot of specific materials. It's free to use, and they're all seamless.
Awesome. Claire, did you have another one? Sorry, were you done with that one?
Because I just thought it would be interesting to see if there was any custom materials that he did in any of the renders, because it looks like a lot of the materials are pretty custom.
A few, not all, yeah.
So I guess that'll take a fair bit of time to import in, eh?
Yeah, so there's also a function in Photoshop for those who don't know. So you just import a texture straight off Google, and you can go, I think it's filter and then 3D and generate normal map. So that normal map's what creates the bumps in your texture and makes it a bit more realistic. And so when you import it into Lumion, you can import the actual image of the texture and then the bump map of the texture. I'll also write that down if it's a bit confusing.
Perfect,
yeah, that'd be good. Thanks, Tim. Jared, I think you have your hand up again. Is that another question as well, or?
Yeah. I was just wondering. So, what program do you model in beforehand, and like what are you using, and what does your company use as well?
I use SketchUp, mainly SketchUp, and like a little bit of Rhino for uni, and we just use Revit for work.
So with Revit, does that go straight into Lumion for that workflow?
Yeah, so I think there's a good Revit Lumion plugin for Revit. It just lets you export it as a .dae file, and that goes straight into Lumion.
Right. And then I wanted to just ask as well, in terms of the cameras, because I know in Revit, when you make a 3D view, like the warping can sometimes just be insane, especially if you're inside. Do you have that kind of trouble in Lumion, or is it better?
No, it's pretty decent in Lumion. One thing that you can do to fix it is to use the 2-point perspective in the camera. So that just makes all your vertical lines straight. And so that minimizes distortion a little bit.
Fantastic. Thanks.
Thanks, Jared. Does anyone else have it? I have another question, sorry.
I think it's a question from Jessica that hasn't answered yet. Do you have any recommended sources for beginners just starting to use Lumion or other rendering softwares?
Other softwares, like other softwares apart from Lumion?
I think to help you learn the softwares, so Lumion or any other rendering softwares, any YouTube channels.
Okay. Yeah. YouTube channels. I haven't come across any in particular. I think there's one I think it's called Let's Show It Better. I think that channel does a lot of tutorials. I think the guy uses Lumion as well. But apart from that, not really.
I think you just had to be in what's his name, Russell Lowe's Studio One.
Yeah.
For any of you who had him, you know what I'm talking
peace.
about. Great guy. I think he taught a lot. Amira just said in the comments as well, LinkedIn Learning is really good to teach programs. You can access it via UNSW for free. Thanks, Amira. Yeah, that's something else as well. UNSW does give you that access via LinkedIn to do learning. So you guys can check it out there as well. But obviously, like Tim said, all sarcasm aside, there is Google. And YouTube is great. YouTube would be very great for this. But I think, there you go. Thanks, Will. But I think Lumion is actually quite intuitive almost, because like you just see the icons and it just tells you everything. It's pretty intuitive. And I think the only thing that you got to play around with in Lumion is just the settings to get used to it and adjust it to your own style. Again, the lighting and the speed. The speed is a really important one. and the transitions as well, I guess, between different scenes. Actually, that's a good question as well, Tim. How do you transition between the different things that you're showing in your videos? Because, like, for example, let's go to co-loader. If you were showing your building in one scene, and then you were showing the views from a particular window, for example, in one scene, how do you transition between the different scenes?
Yeah, so I think my co-loader one's probably not a good example because I'm just flying all over the place. But I think it's a good idea to have like go through your spaces chronologically, even if it's not like going up through the floors or like each individual room. I think, say, if you've got a tower or something, like it's a good idea to transition from the ground floor or the context, and from basically from the macro to the micro. So you're going from large scale to small scale. So you've highlighted the context and also like the tiny fine grained details. In terms of actually like understanding how someone's moving through the building, I think one thing that I forgot to mention was like the render is obviously something that you use to sell your design, but it's also not something that I'd say should be used to navigate your design as well. Like that's what your plans and sections are for. So I think if your plans and sections and all your drawings can speak with your renders, then I think it's a much easier way for tutors or other colleagues to understand how you're moving through this space.
Thanks for that. There's also a question as well from Melissa. Sorry, keep bombarding you with questions.
Okay.
This one is, have you done this course? It's the BL 6003. It's the cinematic space course. And if you have, did this help with your presentations?
I have not done that, but I am considering it as an elective at some point next year.
There you go.
I've heard good things about it.
All right. Well, I think that's...
Sorry, can I ask one more question?
Go for it, Jared.
So from my understanding, from when I last used Lumion with SketchUp, when you're applying the materials in Lumion, it's like if you have all of your stuff on the same layer in SketchUp or they're all colored the same, it'll just apply it to all of that.
Yeah.
Like in one go. So what is it for Revit? Like how does that work? Do you have to like group stuff or layer stuff or?
Yeah, so with Revit, I think I only come across that problem if I'm making stuff from like a generic model and I've just got everything set as like a white ghost material. I think where I'm working, I guess I'm fortunate enough to have like a BIM library that's already been made. So it means that all the materials are already separated from each other. So all the walls are the same material and it's separated from the roofs. So when I import it into Revit, into Lumion, there's usually not too many problems. But if they do end up being the same, I'd probably just like edit type, change the structure, and add like a 1 mil material that's like custom, and then you can change it later on maybe.
Or if you just edited the type and changed the materials, it's a different, as long as it's a different material.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay, all right, cool, thanks.
No worries.
Awesome. I think that's all the questions unless someone else wants to jump in.
Cool.
But I think that's it. Again, if you want to follow Tim, please follow him again. I think it's, what is it, timothy.lau.jpg, is it?
Lau.arc.jpg.
Lau.arc.jpg. So give him a follow on that as well to see some of his renders. And of course, just let us know if you've got any more questions and we'll pass them through as well. But I think to summarize it, and I know we've been through it again, but we'll go through it one last time. Materials, make sure they're correct, oriented the right way, make sure that they're available on site as well, particularly the trees and vegetations. And the speed of it is something else you've got to consider, particularly in videos. So try to have it at least in walking pace or maybe even slower than that. Fly-throughs do get really dizzy and confusing. Don't fly through windows, please. Don't fly through windows and walls and just end up from one room to another. Be realistic with how you kind of walk through the site and walk through the buildings as well. And something else that you wrote, Tim, actually, that I found really interesting. So what is the focus of your film? Spaces should be understood diagrammatically, and your film should clarify this vision. So again, something that David and I will talk about soon is communications and what are you trying to actually say. And every scene in your clip or in your render should actually convey a message. So again, if your project is about materials, if you're focusing on materials, then focus on that, like show the materials, have it focus on tactile experiences. Whereas if it's about sensitive treatment of sight, for example, show how it's being sensitive to sight. For example, if you did consider construction yet, don't show the construction. Don't show your dodgy little SketchUp mistake. Don't show that. Just show the material, show the atmosphere. Like, be specific on what you want to show and have the pace and the music of that support that theme. So everything you do should be anchored by a theme. And that's something that Tim already wrote. And we'll figure out a way to give you these slides as well. But again, consider the orientation of the materials again, and make sure the people are in the right place and the right scale. Scale is obviously a really important thing as well. And kind of mix and match your platforms. Use SketchUp and then move it here and then use Photoshop again. And don't be scared to kind of chuck them around. It makes it more original. If you want to be more funky, add your own little characters in there, Shrek or Gingerbread Man or whatever you want to do in there as well. And try not to stick with the stock standard materials as well. I know something else that Lumion does, if you're using SketchUp, if it doesn't read the texture, it'll give you a default color or grass or a default just material, and it kind of looks like not good at all. So consider that as well. And especially in Lumion as well, consider where your sun is. Make sure it's oriented the right way and it's not facing the wrong way, especially when you do the renders. And yeah, I think that's about it. I think, was that an all right summary, Tim? I don't know if there's anything else I missed in that. But yes, if you guys got any more questions that you can't think about now, just let us know and we'll pass them forward. But other than that, check out his work at Luminosity. I think the 2021 Luminosity exhibition is up, but I'm not sure if the 2020 exhibition is still up out there somewhere, but I'm sure that it is. Otherwise, again, follow him on Instagram and perhaps on YouTube somewhere. I think he's on YouTube if you want to see that. So other than that, thanks, Tim, for that. And if you guys want to stick around, we do have some tips as well for presentations right now as well. So David, do you want to share that screen? That's okay. And particularly for those of you in Ainsley studio, so what happened was in setting this event up, we actually had a talk with Ainsley, and something she wanted us to tell you guys in Studio 4 is the way you present actually matters just as much as the quality of your presentation. So like whatever you're showing is just as equally important as the way you present it, particularly for online. Okay, little insider tip she did admit to is sometimes when students don't present well, and that is via, let's say, reading paragraphs of information, she does get bored and she does get like a little zoned out. And the thing with that is when you finish presenting, the tutors won't know what to say or what to comment, and that's because they've kind of gotten lost. So presentation skills do matter a lot. And so this is just a few tips and tricks on how you guys can go about this, particularly now that we're under COVID and online presentations as well. So to start off with, there is no bad projects, literally. Then it's all just a matter of how you present it and articulate it. And I stand by this project. So by this point, so if you have a project that's a little, not underqualified, but it's not as ready as you wanted it to be, or it's not your best project to date, you can still get a really, really good mark out of it, depending on how you present it. Again, if you're holding a model, which obviously in online terms, it would be your digital model, again, with your fly-throughs, like I said, don't show the parts that are missing or are, not correct. So make sure you show the right parts, the parts you have points to discuss about, the parts that you are confident about or you have good selling points on. Consider showing those instead. And try to play on the strengths of your scheme. So like I said before, if your your scheme is about materials and not about, for example, the construction of it, don't talk too much on construction. but focus on the material, solve with that first as a key point and grab their attention. Again, it's just about your confidence and how you present it. So for me personally, start with the things that you're confident about, because that will determine the pace and the atmosphere of your presentation. I think, David, the next point is your point if you wanted to elaborate on that one. Oh, is David there? I think he's frozen. I'll go to the next one, sorry. But another thing as well that I like to do is to draw upon experience and knowledge and things that you've experienced or that you've already learned. And what I mean by that is, like, for example, if you chose a particular material or you set it out, like you planned out your space in a particular way, and you've done that because you've seen that somewhere or you've experienced something. Oh yeah, Tim, sorry, you can. Is that still your screen? Sorry, just realized. So sorry. Yeah, with that, sorry about that. We didn't realize. Yeah, so what I mean by that is draw upon your own experience. So, for example, if you know that you don't like getting sun in the bedroom because it's west oriented, maybe you live in a house where your bedroom is on the west and you don't like that, and then you put your bedroom in your Studio 3 project, for example, on the north. Explain it, like, you know, you don't want to get sun in your eye, blah blah blah. So use real life experiences to support your arguments, and to help with like, I guess, presenting your works as well. And another thing as well is to know your project inside and out, and kind of have a rebuttal, actually, because something that your tutors might do, and some of you guys may have already had this experience, is they may question certain things. So for example, they may ask why that material, or why did you go with this concept, or shouldn't you use steel instead, or blah 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 blah, or like, you know, how are you going to import that? Because we had that question in Studio 6 as well. So something like that, you have to have a rebuttal that shows that you know your project and that defends your project really well. I know for me, when I was doing Studio 4, we had a guest marker. So that's something else that you guys might be new to, is tutors tend to bring guest markers from their work. And these people don't know anything about the project. They don't know anything about the brief. They just read it on that day. And that's why it's so important to know your project inside and out, because they'll look at your project, and unlike your tutor who's seen it for the last 10 weeks, they'll know nothing and they'll question every single thing you've showed them. And if you're able to kind of answer them confidently, your tutors will notice that and they'll mark you off for that. Trust me, it works. It definitely works. So think about that and make sure you have a rebuttal subtly in your mind, even for the things that you didn't show. Like we said before, if you didn't show the, I guess, underdeveloped things, just still have a backup plan for those in case they do ask you about that as well. Another thing as well, extending on Ainsley's point, actually, on not reading paragraphs. So again, please don't read paragraphs. It's the last thing you want to do is just bore them out by reading a whole chunk, and it takes up your entire time as well. Rather than doing that, what I like to do is actually just have a general, very, very general idea of what you want to talk about. Identify the strengths. Like I said before, start with the strengths. Like, don't talk about the weaknesses unless they ask you to. So just think about what you want to present and then present that one first. And then with that, so with that, don't show them something that you don't know. And I think another thing as well is, if you have models, if you can talk while you, like, I guess when it's online, rotate your model or have the video playing in the background, or you have a physical model, give them a chance to hold it. Something physical is always better than something that's actually just on the screen, but unfortunately we are a little bit limited. So that's why I said have a little bit of a walkthrough with it as well, so that they can see what you're talking about. Because remember, at the end of the day, architects do speak through the drawings. They do speak through images. So have your model, have your physical or digital model support your arguments as well. David, can we just share the screen again? Sorry, I think that was Tim's screen. So can we just get that one up? Sorry. Cool, thank you.
Sorry, can you see he had a heart attack? So.
Yeah, sorry, no, I was looking at the screen. I lost my point. If anyone noticed that, I'm so sorry. Oh, it's gone again.
Oh shit, sorry. Yeah, it's going crazy right
No,
now.
that's all good. Oh, that's what I was saying. Yeah, just don't have a speech ready. Actually, I know that sounds a bit counterintuitive, but don't have a speech ready, because what tends to happen with speeches is you rehearse all these things you want to say and it becomes irrelevant sometimes. Like sometimes they might ask you a question and you answer it in such a way that doesn't actually answer the question because you have this speech that you so desperately want to like rehearse, but it's not effective. So what you actually want to do is treat the presentation as a conversation, and that's my main. If there's anything you want to take away from this little bit, it's that is that treat the presentation as a conversation, and remember that the conversation at the end of the day is just you and the tutor that you've been working with every single week for the last 3 months. So they know your project. So don't be scared about it. They've already seen the worst of it. They've already seen it when it was underdeveloped, when it was still just diagrams and party drawings. So don't worry about that. Don't, like, if anything, it's a big relief that you've finalized it and you've, kind of made it even better than what they saw last time they saw it. So just have a conversation. Like I said, just point out the strengths and just showcase your work. It's not something you should be scared about. It's not something that you should rehearse too much about, but just something that you are proud of, and just like I said, identify the great things. Tell them, hey, this is what I've done by the end of week 12, and that's all it is. And another good pointer is actually, if you're kind of brave enough to do this, identify the weaknesses. I know that's kind of opposite of what I said, but again, with that, have a rebuttal to that. So, for example, I had this one project where I had more questions by the end of it than answers, but then what ended up happening with that was I started with a quote from John Gamble, and all of you guys know John Gamble, and I said, John Gamble once said that architecture is not about answering, but about questioning things, and that's another way you could do it. And from there I led on to say, so the few things I questioned about this is blah, 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 and I answered it through this and this and this and this. So highlight, briefly touch on the bad things, but then divert that away and focus again on the good things about your project. Will, you had your hand up for a while. Sorry, I kind of ignored you there.
Sorry, Jean, did you happen to go through my points? Or
no, I asked you to go through it, but I think you lagged at that point. Sorry, Will, we're ignoring you again.
Yeah, okay, I'll cover through my points first. So I wanted to touch base with everyone with this YouTube channel. They're quite important. They're actually lecturers in architecture school from Melbourne, but they are friends with the tutors that teach at UNSW Architecture. And their biggest critique on architecture schools are actually that they confuse how they teach party and concept to us, which is arguably the most important thing about your design proposal and your architectural review to your tutorial group. So before I get into it, it's basically called the what, why, how method and that basically forms your basis of critical thinking and how you form your architecture project. Basically, the what is a party or architectural gesture, and the why is actually your concept, and the how is just how you represent those things for your drawings. At UNSW Architecture, they actually do teach these things, but hopefully Paul Hogman doesn't have his snipers to shoot me for saying this. But the reason that people do get confused at UNSW Architecture is actually because the way they teach party and concept is split across the 6 different studios. So if you remember Russell Lowe's studio, they get us their word or the sections, and they basically get us to form an architectural scheme for experimental projects using those different words below and top datum. For people doing the first year course, Shaolin, the biggest challenge for that National Art School project is that you're forming an architectural gesture or party, which has to translate between 3 different typologies for your ensemble project. The biggest challenge is making sure that it's all consistent across all 3. In Studio 3, Paula goes through the Bernard Tsumi method, which covers context, content, and content. That's basically what, why, how, which these guys do explain in a different order. And the biggest challenge of Ainsley's studio is that we have to balance 3 different perspectives: the Aboriginal people, the industrial heritage of the site, and the current people of the site, and basically make a radical gesture that covers all 3 of those things. I think these guys can explain it much better than I can, but that's just how it relates to our architecture school. Please go watch these videos. Definitely the what, why, how. It's only 20 minutes. Very critical though. they say that the party or architecture gesture is what people struggle with the most, but conceptually, everyone can make a concept and do it well. It's more about the party that people struggle with the most. So yeah, go watch that.
I do agree. That's actually a really good way to approach it. Like if you consider, and this links back to what Tim was saying with themes, is what is your project about? Why is that the main focus of your project? And how have you communicated it? And that's, again, links back to what Tim said and what I said about just answering your own questions in your projects as well. So yeah, please go check that out, and we will link that in the chat as well. Will, finally, do you want to ask your question? You're mute. That was anticlimactic. You're mute. Oh, can you hear him, David? Or
no, it's just like thing in mind. Yeah.
Okay, well, anyways, while you get that sorted, lastly as well, presentations as well is not just the communicative aspect of it, it's also the drawings. So today we talked about videos and talking, but also another important thing is the drawings. And like I said before, architects, we communicate through drawings. Also because that's just the simplest way for, in future, like clients to understand our concepts, and because they're not going to understand, like, you know, how the northern sun like gives better sun qualities than western sun, blah blah blah. You need to show it through drawings. And another thing to consider is what you're showing in those drawings, and I think also Tim touched on that as well. But particularly for plans and sections, David, I think we had a slide on that as well. But
is it this point right here? Sections are better than showing.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
Do you want to do that one actually, and then I'll elaborate on that one?
Yes.
You had a good way to say that one.
So I think just remember, this might be revision for a lot of you guys, but remember some drawings are better at showing other things than other drawings. So I think this even comes to your design process. When you're designing, floor plan is good once you have your party. It's very good to design programmatically and know where your schedule is. But designing section is much more effective because it shows how your space is used, how light comes into it, how motion comes into space, and more importantly, how it inhabits it for people. So check sections, make sure you have a lot of people in your sections. A lot of people put a lot of people and parties in their renders. That's something you might want to try avoid more, because you have to remember these renders or collages are hero shots. It shouldn't take away from the focus, which is your architecture. So put more people in your sections, put people in your plan where possible to show circulation and how it's used. And renders people should be sparingly, etc. And that might come into play with how you choose what drawings to present in your design proposal 1 for Studio 4.
Another thing with sections as well, I know it's so tempting to just cut the section in the easiest position that may make it easier for you to draw, or the first spot that you see. But section arguably is probably the strongest drawing you'll have on the page. And sections, like where you cut your section, matters so much. You should cut it where there is the most interesting play of levels or spaces colliding, so junction points. And for example, in my Studio 6, I had like cutouts in the floors and also like skylights and stuff. So you got to cut where you can see most of these features, just so that the tutors can understand that. And as well, like if you're using things such as the context, so again, I'll bring it back to Studio 6, but this might apply to everyone else. I aligned the height and the ceiling and floor heights of my building to the neighboring building. And when you cut that in sections, so my section didn't just stop at my building, I cut the section through the next building as well. And what happened with that is the guest marker that I had on the day, again, this guest marker has never seen my work. The guest marker, the first thing he said was, oh, I can see you used the algorithm and the structure of the neighboring building to dictate your own one. And that's exactly what I wanted to show, which is a good thing, because I didn't even have to tell him, I didn't even talk about it yet, and he saw it straight away. So if you have these rules and you have these little things, then show it. You've done all this work for 12 weeks, you might as well show it, right? You don't want to put in all this effort in, and then by the end of it, you just cut a wrong section and it just spoils everything. So use your sections for the right purposes. Like David said, sections show how the internal spaces work and how humans interact with the spaces. But also for plan, I think David mentioned this as well, what you can do, I don't know, I mentioned Ivy before, but Ivy did this as well and a few others in my cohort. You can you can use your plan as well as a diagram. So for example, to show circulation, you can show people and like how they move around the space as well. And something as big as Studio 4 project, I know like the actual tunnel and platform itself is huge to fill up the space. What me and my friend, I think Renee's in here, so like Renee and I did, we'd put little people in there as well. It kind of just fills up the space a bit more, prevents your drawings from looking quite empty. So something else to consider, and you can use it, or perhaps your plan, you can identify where different spaces are. Just use it as a diagram as well if you can. That's just another way to do it. Sometimes we have like a page limit, so that's just another way to I guess exploit the little loophole there. Other than that, I think, is that all the things we had to say, David, or is it?
I think I forgot to say one more thing,
Yeah.
and then we'll move on.
Yeah.
So just about party concept and how that I was talking about earlier, I think these guys mentioned it. You can actually knock out everything that your tutorial needs to know about your project in the first minute. So try your best to do that. What, why, how. And my tutor an old tutor that I used to have in first year described this to me in a pretty funny way. Once you knock out your fundamentals of your project, you can be as wanky, as complex, as poetic as you want afterwards. As long as they understand everything in the first minute, go for it. But yeah,
I agree with that. That's why I said before, like, start with the strongest points. And now David's saying, like, start with the what, why, how. So the way you start it, as with any speech or any work, the way you start it is so important, because that sets the tone on whether or not they'll be listening or not. And your body language as well. Just be chill. Literally, if you're nervous, if you're not a body language, moving hands kind of person, sit down. Like, sit on the edge of the table, hold your model. Another thing as well, like I said before, play with your model. If you're fidgety, I had one that you could lift up the different levels, and that's for the collider one. That's for, you can lift it up and you can show them, oh, look, on this level, you'll get this experience. On this level, you can get this experience. And make it look like you're actually presenting if you're actually just fidgeting because you're nervous. Just hide it. Or have a water bottle in your hand. These little things work. Just don't stand in front of the screen with your back towards them. That is obvious. But if you have a bottle in your hand, it just looks like you've just been thirsty. That's it. Like, they won't notice that. So that's something else. And I think that's about it for the thing. Let me just double check this. Oh, there's a few concept board things, but I know Ainsley used to do concept board last year, and I think she's using it this year as well. So make use of that with Ainsley's studio, and actually not just in general. A lot of tutors will look at progress over result, and that's something else to consider. And concept board is a good platform for that, because it does track all your progress throughout the term. And I know it's a bit nerve-wracking to get everyone to see that, but the good thing with sharing as much work as possible throughout the term is the more you give in throughout the term to your tutor, when you present, half of the work is already done for you. You don't have to spend a good chunk of your time explaining it, because they've already known it. So by the presentation, all that's left to do is highlight the good parts. They don't need to know like all the progress, because they've already known your project inside and out. If they don't know your project by the end of presentation, then they'll ask a lot of questions, and it's a big trouble kind of thing for you. It just causes you so much more trouble, and just don't do that. Just present. Don't be scared. Just present it and relax, and just think of it as a conversation. But concept board, please update your work on there. Do little annotations. Treat it as a little notebook diary thing. And yeah, show them where you got inspiration from. Like Tim showed us where he got inspirations from as well. Use precedents, use that as well, and show them what you like, so that they can gauge where your project is going as well. Oh, and one last thing as well, much like what I said before about showing the best parts about your projects, play on your skills. So if you're a really, really good model maker, when you present, show the model. Show the model as much as you can. If you're really good at drawings, point at the drawings. If you're like Tim and you are really good with videography and stuff like that, let your videos do most of the talking. and don't let the same concept be communicated over the different drawings, like and platforms. So like we mentioned before, plans show you one thing, sections show you one thing. If you've already touched on materials on your video, don't focus on materials perhaps on your on your render. Do it in a different platform. And if you have organic shapes and stuff like that, choose the correct model making software. Don't make it on Revit, because Revit might be a little bit harder to make that. So maybe something like a Rhino would be easier. Or if you can't render it like that as well, maybe hand drawings, these little things. It's a lot easier and a lot better for you to do hand drawings and stuff rather than limit yourself by choosing the wrong platform. So if you know you wanted to make something organic and you just know you can't model it on Revit, then, I don't know, learn how to use, let's say, SketchUp or Rhino, or learn how to draw it and communicate it that way. Just play your strengths and don't limit yourselves to just what you think is expected, because there's many ways of communicating architecture. And on that note, I think, Will, your question is it? Oh, we have 5 minutes. Crap. Will, you're still on mute. Okay. Did you want to type it, or? Okay, I think he's typing it. But yes, thanks everyone for listening as well. I think, David, was that everything that we needed to say as well?
I don't think it's written here, but I'll just mention it. It's quite obvious, but time limits, especially if there's a guest jury there and you're presenting your project, make sure once that time limit goes off, you finish right on the dot. That's only because in terms of studio culture, talking beyond the time limit can actually be one of the most disrespectful things you can do, because that takes away time from your tutor and the guest speakers in giving you feedback for your projects. So even if you don't get to explain everything, just make sure you stop. But yeah, that's about it.
Yeah. Other than that, I think that's everything from us. Again, recap, show your best aspects of your project. Treat it as a conversation. That's the one thing I want you to take away, is treat it as a conversation. Even body language wise, act the way you would with a friend, whether that's holding a water bottle or sitting down at the edge of the table slightly, holding your model. Be relaxed, chill, and don't plan too much about it. Don't overthink it. Don't read paragraphs. Ainsley specifically told us, don't read paragraphs upon paragraphs, please, and just have fun with it and use the different platforms. Use the videos that Tim showed you to make to communicate your ideas, and don't just rely on yourself if you're too nervous to present it. If you don't think that's your best way of presenting, use something else. Like I said before, use your strengths. Don't do something that you're not confident about. And that's about it, I think. Again, feel free for you guys, if you got any more questions later on, hit us up on the DMs on Facebook or Instagram as well. And hopefully, that's Shrek. Oh, you so good at Shrek. But that's Tim's iconic Shrek inclusion there in his works. So that's his little quirk. Again, you guys need to develop your own one and have fun with it, because at the end of the day, that's all it is. Just have fun with it. And yeah, hopefully see you guys in the next event. We do have a master's event coming up as well. And that's for any of you guys continuing to masters in UNSW and wanting to see which stream suits you best and which one interests you the most. That's given by a series of our own academic staff, which includes Phil and Paul and all that as well, and a few more. And other than that, thanks everyone for coming as well. Thanks, Jared. And yeah, I'll see you in the next one, guys. Thank you.